Okay, folks, that's 11:02. I'll get us started now. Probably a few more to join, but about sort of 40 or so. So we're almost there. Welcome everybody, first of all, to our webinar today, How to Harness a New Era of Innovation. With three really good speakers, hopefully you'll get something from it. I think, fair to say, it's been a strange old year, and there's been a fair bit of change in the air. But that change has been going on for some time now, and I suppose this year's just probably accelerated that change somewhat. So I think this is about looking at how we can look at that huge scale up sector just now across the UK, and the sort of the value you can extract from that. So without sort of further ado, well, I should say my name is Jamie Watts. I'm Amplify Solutions Commercial Director. I will hand you first and foremost on to Claudia Duffy. Now, Claudia is the founder of Innovare IP, and I'm going to pop her slides on now and let Claudia chat to you through that stuff. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Can everybody hear me? At least the panelists. So the sound is okay. So it is a pleasure to be speaking about innovation management, and most importantly, how to extract more value from your innovation. And I am indeed the founder of Innovare IP, and if you don't mind moving to the next slide, Jamie. So I'm a scientist, and I have qualified as a patent attorney, and most recently I have also become an entrepreneur and founded Innovare IP. I also act as IP consultant. I also spend time as pseudo in-house attorney, so I work closely with technology companies, and I also provide IP training and mentoring. But most importantly, what I enjoy doing is the so-called IP auditing and evaluation of the innovation developed by my clients. Apart from having lived, worked, and studied in 3 European countries, which allows me to apply a broader view, a broader thinking on the commercialization of intellectual property rights, on the valuation and evaluation of innovation. I'm also interested in looking at the interface between how companies use their intellectual assets, how those assets can be capitalized on, and also often I act as advisory board member. So moving on to the next slide, just a little bit about the difference between a lawyer or a solicitor and a patent attorney. And Rooney Nemo is a firm of solicitors, whereas Innovare IP is a firm of patent and trademark attorneys. So lawyers and also trademark attorneys have a strong focus on the law, on the legislation, whereas we as patent attorneys are somewhat of a hybrid. So we need to be scientists first and foremost, and then we qualify as lawyers. And because of that, we can focus on innovation and we understand the innovation. So moving on to the next slide, where does a company's value actually come from? And as you can see, most of the value, even for large companies, if you think of multinationals such as Apple, Samsung, and so on, the value, you'll be surprised to hear, comes from the intangible assets developed by those companies. And those intangible assets come in 2 main forms. So we've got intellectual assets, and this is where innovation and invention comes in. And of course, these are intangible creations, which are property, therefore they are definable and tradable. So maybe bought, sold like property, they can be licensed. And apart from intellectual assets, we need to start to talk about intellectual property protection for those intellectual assets. And these are exclusive IP rights. They can be national or regional. They can be registrable or sometimes not registrable. And over the next slides, we'll understand the difference between intellectual assets and intellectual property rights. But first, we need to create those intellectual assets. So we need to innovate. And in the most basic sense, innovation is an advancement over existing knowledge, and this can be done by means of a new idea, so we create something brand new, or also by means of using existing knowledge to create new uses for known devices, products, processes. So innovation is the application of original and more effective solutions. And innovation often paves the way to inventions, and inventions have to be classified as such if they meet a higher standard from the point of view of patenting. So on to the next slide. We can look at the types of intellectual property rights which can be used in order to protect these intellectual property protection, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with copyright. Let's not forget database rights for those of you working in the IT sector, unregistered design rights, unregistered trademark protection, and of course, know-how and trade secrets. And I have highlighted know-how and trade secrets here because this is where the inventions, this is where the innovation comes from. And these are key to a business, seeing that the businesses will first start to innovate and then look at protecting that innovation. Of course, we have the more expensive registered intellectual property rights, and they are more expensive because they need to be applied for. And again, you start to recognize trademarks, registered designs, patents, and the so-called utility models, which are quite similar to patents, but they have a shorter duration and they're only available in certain countries. Again, here I have highlighted patents because, as you'll see later, I'm going to be talking about how to capitalize on patents. So on to the next slide. We can see that for a single product, such as this glucose monitor, we need to have a portfolio of intellectual property rights because each of them protects certain aspects of the product. Of course, we have trademarks for the brand name, we have copyright for the software, for the user manual. There are trade secrets. Of course, we don't need to always disclose the secret sauce, shall I say. We've got designs for the shape of the device, for instance, and most importantly, we have patents, and patents typically protect how the device works. So on to the next slide. How can a company capitalize on its intellectual assets and its intellectual property rights? And I'm always asking my clients to try to make a distinction between intellectual assets and intellectual property rights, because quite often companies raising investment will be asked, have you got a patent? And for many professionals, intellectual property simply equates a patent. And this is quite wrong because, as you can see, we need to look at the source of the innovation, which leads to a patent application in the end. So how can companies capitalize on intellectual assets and intellectual property rights? Well, there are two known means of doing that. And the first one is the so-called R&D tax claim, and so research and development tax claim. And for this for the company to qualify for such a claim, they must work on innovative projects in science and technology, and they must research and develop an advancement in their field. However, HMRC has applied a particular definition to qualifying R&D, and companies must demonstrate that this is indeed an advance in science and technology, and many fields can qualify. I've given a few examples here, such as construction, manufacturing, engineering, retail, information technology, and so on, but not a social science. So you have to be careful in this regard. And also, the R&D project must relate to a company's trade, and it is either an existing project or a project that the company intends to start. So the definition or the criteria which HMRC applies to qualifying R&D are that the company has to demonstrate that they looked for an advance in science and technology, that they had to overcome an uncertainty, and they try themselves to overcome this uncertainty rather than through an intermediary or a consultant, for instance. And quite often you'll find that qualifying innovation does not necessarily mean patentable innovation. Therefore, apart from the R&D tax claim, where we need to think of the innovation projects that the companies have developed, the next type of claim is the so-called patent box claim. So that innovation has to be patentable innovation. And again, HMRC devised this scheme to encourage companies to keep and commercialize intellectual property in the United Kingdom. And here the HMRC guidance is clearer in that the corporation tax is reduced to 10% for profits earned from patented inventions. And the company can either own the patent itself, or it can license the patent on an exclusive basis. And that patent can be granted by the UK Intellectual Property Office, by the European Patent Office. But as you can see, having a patent in one of the countries listed here, which are members of the European Economic Area, would also allow the company to qualify for the patent box claim. There are similar schemes in other countries. So if you're thinking of extending your operations in Ireland or France, for instance, please make sure that you inquire with local professionals about making patent box claims in those countries. So just a little bit more about the patent box, onto the next slide. So companies must elect into the patent box after the patent grant, so hence the name patent box, but the relief is backdated to the date of filing of the patent application. And this is important because there is a period of time, anything from 2 to 5 years, between the date of filing of the patent application and the grant of the patent application. And the company could start to sell patented products or products covered by pending patents. And once the patent box claim is logged with HMRC, those profits can be backdated. So what does the company have to do? So it needs to apply a funnel down approach. It has to look at its innovation and decide which one can qualify as inventions. This is where the funneling down approach comes from. Then those inventions are filed as patent applications, which are prosecuted to grant. And at this stage, the company has to start to map the patents or the applications to the products. Once the patent grants, it can initiate the patent box claim. And yet again, it needs to map the product sales to the profits in order to obtain a reduction in its corporation tax. So on to the next slide, yet again. How do you do this? How do companies manage their innovation for R&D and patent box tax reliefs? So if you remember, as at the start of my presentation, I talked about innovation being an intangible asset. Therefore, we must have a record of that asset. And the example I like to give is, what if the innovator was run over by a bus? What happens? Would that knowledge disappear with them, or has that knowledge somehow been committed to written documents? It is datable and traceable and is complete, and therefore is transferable. So moving on, there are ways of expediting a patent grant from the UK perspective, and thinking of the demographics of the companies attending today's presentation. It may be that some means of expediting the UK grant in order to bring that patent box claim forward may be applicable to them. For instance, Green Channel, there is a so-called Green Channel, and applicants can request accelerated prosecution of the patent application if the invention has an environmental benefit. There are other ways of expediting grant, and they are called patent prosecution highways. And I don't want to talk any more about this. I just wanted to let you know that should you wish to bring your patent box claim forward, there are means of doing that. On to the next slide. Can you expedite the patent grant by subject matter? And the key determining factor here is sufficiency of patent applications. And that means that is a patent application properly exemplified, and are you able to provide a recipe? Are you able to provide a disclosure as to how the invention works? So by subject matter, yes, you can expedite it for mechanics, simple products, software, electronics, simply because the technical development of these inventions do not take such a long time. Maybe processing methods, chemistry inventions. The reason why it is difficult to expedite the grant of chemical patents is because theoretical processing routes often cannot be implemented experimentally, and we need an enabling disclosure for a patent application to proceed to grant. And it is quite difficult to expedite the grant of pharmaceutical or products. And as we're all seeing the development of the vaccine for COVID, simply because it takes a long time to prove that it works as intended, and also it has to undergo clinical trials. So on to the next slide. If we think of, what balance should a company strike? It always has to consider whether the innovation is to be kept as a know-how, trade secret, confidential information, and then perhaps an R&D tax claim is more appropriate. However, if that innovation is elevated to the standard of an invention, in that it is novel, it is inventive, then a patent box claim is appropriate. So there isn't a right or wrong way of capitalizing on the intangible assets. The companies need to make that assessment on a continual basis and annual basis. So on to the next slide. This is how it should be done. So I just wanted to show you that in the most basic sense, it is important that companies keep track of their innovation. So they start to list their projects, either processes or devices or whatever. They need to identify the innovators, simply because for R&D tax claim purposes, the costs associated with the salaries of innovators can be part of a claim. They need to decide whether it is know-how, therefore a patent, an R&D tax claim is more appropriate, or they need to decide whether to file a patent application and then proceed to the grant of that patent application and then put in a patent box claim. And again, once we have a patent application, we need to know the filing date, because if you remember, we can backdate patent box claims to the date of filing of the patent application. We need to know whether the patent is owned or licensed, and we need to know the grant date, because that grant date triggers the right time when a patent box claim can be applied for. So the last few slides, still having doubts about patenting? Perhaps not. And this is a statement which I hear a lot. It is not worth patenting because the big companies will just copy me anyway, and I cannot afford to enforce my patent in court. My rights will be ignored. I might as well just press ahead without patent protection. I've given you a few reasons for patenting, and the third reason there says your patent may be enforced against the big company and generate income by means of reducing your corporation tax. So I'll leave you with that thought there. And on to the next slide, I'm actually going to talk about one of my clients, or one of Innovare IP clients, and they are called Armadillo. And they are a company established in Edinburgh in April 2010. They designed these beautiful pods as temporary accommodation. This year they have won the Queen's Award for Enterprise. and they sell their products in UK, Ireland, Europe, Australia, UAE, and so on. And on to the next slide, I have provided the comments of Archie Hunter, who is the founder of Armadillo. And if you remember, they were a company founded in 2010. They have made their first claim in September 2015, so 5 years later. And that first claim was only for 37K. However, the amount of the R&D tax claim has increased every year because the company carried out more R&D activity and also has become more adept at recording and documenting their activity. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it is important to manage the innovation, not least for the purposes of being able to quickly file R&D tax claims. For year ending 2019, they had a claim which now amounts to 139K. And the company says now it's important that we adopt a more disciplined approach to R&D. And I would like to highlight the fact that Archie Hunter, the founder of Armadillo, leaves you the recommendation of, would strongly recommend that if you're not already claiming, you should investigate how it could benefit your company. So with that thought, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll move on to Amplify.
Thanks very much, Claudia. That was great. Loads of information taken there, everybody. This has been recorded, so there will be a recording available following the webinar that you can pick up or share as well. So thanks very much for that, Claudia. I'm going to pass on now to Roger Daines. Roger's the regional manager for Amplify Solutions based in Edinburgh. So I'll let Roger, happy to pick up now. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well and keeping up with the daily developments in the world that we're seeing. It's all very, very interesting and engaging. For the next 10 minutes or so, yeah, it's my aim to, I suppose, develop in a way what Claudia's covered there in terms of some of her clients, the innovative landscape that we're occupying at the moment, and how best, particularly SMEs, can utilize the various government support that's available. So first and foremost, who are Amplify Solutions? Well, founded by Chris Malin and Jeff Drennan about 6 years ago, combined 35 years experience as FDs of British Telecom. Their focus back then was in particular in commercial and transformational finance, which included a lot of R&D tax relief. It was at that point they thought, let's go out on our own, let's boost the prevalence of R&D tax relief and focus on that purely, which is what they've done, brought the best elements out of the corporate world and into the SME world, as it were. In that period of time, we've now grown up to a team of 20. I'm employee number one over in Scotland. We have around a dozen data analysts who will analyse the nominal ledger of an innovative business. In conjunction to that, we have a number of technical case study writers who will build a robust technical narrative in conjunction with the data. Amongst those are qualified accountants, several of whom have backgrounds, in addition to the accountants, I should say. We have people backgrounds in software engineering, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering who can bring huge swathes of experience into the analysis that they're doing. We're HQ'd in Northern Ireland. Our recent opening of the office in Scotland earlier this year is indicative of our growth aspirations across the UK mainland. As it happens, we have significant client base now across Scotland, but also growing into the south as well. One of our particular USPs that we like to promote over our competitors, so to speak, is that each and every one of our clients have and will continue to benefit from a member of our management team working on their claim from beginning to end. So that would be a Chris, it would be a Jeff, it would be our FD Lisa, who help with not only the data analysis, but also the technical narrative, which essentially helps capture as much cost as possible and make these claims optimized as much as possible. So the benefits of R&D, essentially, I suppose it's important to note that it doesn't just support innovation per se. It's actually, for many young businesses, high growth businesses, a vital financial lifeline, particularly SMEs, who in fact are the main beneficiaries of the scheme. 80% of whom, it's reported, have actually reported declining revenues as a result of the pandemic. So essentially what the R&D scheme is trying to do is make it less expensive and de-risking the process on behalf of these companies. The headline rate of 33 pence in the pound is the amount that a company can benefit from an additional tax deduction, which is a significant cash injection to business at any time, especially to extend operating runway. Profit-making businesses can offset their CT up to 24.7 pence in the pound. So again, significant tax relief there for profit-making businesses. I suppose that the key decision at any point of exercising claim is to optimize the outcome. For profit-making businesses, that essentially would be to do CT offset. It can be carried forward against previous CT years or indeed carried forward for several years. That's also an option. Loss-making businesses can surrender a loss and convert this to cash, which might be I suppose the most advisable or most sensible thing to do at that time. Long term, it might be suboptimal from a financial perspective, but cash there and then is vital to many businesses, and they do essentially convert those losses into cash. But I suppose that regardless of how the benefit is ultimately availed, the proceeds of these CT savings or cash injections back into the business are typically reinvested to grow headcount and CapEx, enabling further expansion and higher future claims. So who do we currently work with? Well, we see activity predominantly in these four sectors. Tech, a lot of high growth, scale up SaaS businesses, obviously developing platform integrations, mobile apps. Life sciences, I think it's been most prevalent this year in the media for obvious reasons. The tireless race to develop a vaccine, for example, against COVID, a hugely increased activity this year, development of new drugs, medical devices, and the clinical trials thereof, all of which is R&D applicable activity and spend. In engineering, a lot of precision engineering, the development of sustainable products, new materials, and so on, other areas with notable increases in recent years. Manufacturing, that would, for example, include food and drink. Across Scotland in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen an explosion in the likes of craft breweries and distilleries. So regardless of the sectors there, one thing in common with any business is the typical life cycle it might go through or would go through for its innovation. So this image here is effectively cross-sector, think of it that way. The start of any creative journey would see a phase of idea generation, of market research, which at that point in time would not qualify for R&D purposes. The clock starts ticking, as it were, when spend is applied to the business to create something, solving a problem, overcoming a technical uncertainty, which ultimately has an unknown outcome. The securing of patents and protection of IP, which Claudia discussed earlier, again, that would not per se qualify in R&D terms, but would nonetheless safeguard future innovation and commercial application of the products or processes that they're developing. Further iterations of the product may be developed following, further iterations of the product may be developed prior to production. The cost, again, would apply for R&D just in the first iteration of the process. The cycle itself would end at the point the project can be applied commercially, but that's not necessarily the end of the journey for that particular product or solution. We work with businesses all the time who are effecting appreciable enhancements to products and services following the release. Those appreciable enhancements, the activity and spend therein, would also count for taking steps towards R&D. It's also important to note that successes and failures can qualify. It sounds silly, I know, but failure can be rewarded. So 5 key areas of spend, or pillars of spend, if you like, when it comes to qualifying R&D activity. Number 1, people. That would include, for example, payroll, national insurance contributions, and employer pension contributions, for instance. Subcontractors, often deployed for the likes of software development purposes or precision engineering. These are applied at 65% of the actual cost, 35% that is effectively excluded from the calculation is the government's way of excluding profits, which would not be qualifying in this case. As a market observation here, we're seeing a lot more younger companies outsourcing R&D in order to mitigate risk at an early stage, ensure that very, very critical development work is carried out by experts in, let's say, Asian, Eastern European markets for software development. This enables a development work to be undertaken to a high caliber, albeit is claimed at a lower rate of 65%, but ultimately they're ensuring that the work they're carried out is robust enough for future success. Contrary to that, further on the growth curve, PE, VC-backed companies will be more focused on in-housing their R&D in order to protect that IP. Full allocation of those costs can be therefore claimed, and increasing the claimable value in that particular year. And equally, larger established companies, those who have already commercialized, will innovate periodically, as and when they feel they have the bandwidth to do so. And they would bring in-housing expertise to upscale their R&D activity at that point in time. So utilities is a further cost. It's not particularly significant, but nonetheless contributes to a higher level of claim. This might comprise heating or lighting or power, office or lab premises that enable the innovation itself to occur. Consumables, that would be any materials purchased in the process of developing and prototyping a new product or further iteration. And software, in this respect, this would be the software costs for hosting, licensing, for instance, that enables that R&D to happen as a matter of course. Think of, for example, CAD for an engineering business. By far the largest areas of spend that we would observe there with each and every one of the claims that we do are people and subcontractors. But as a specialist business, as all Amplify do, we take it to further details. A little bit of a freebie, if you like. I'll give you an idea of another 5 spends that we would typically look at. The R&D, research and development, and capital allowances, it's a tax break that runs in tandem with R&D tax credits, as it were, but if used in tandem with R&D, it can generate significant cash savings as well. So for instance, the cost of acquiring a building premises to host that R&D activity, that can be offset against CT, which doubles up, I suppose, the benefit of the R&D development activity that takes place within. EPW, so that's externally provided workers. It's effectively kind of, in a way, it's like a subcontractor, but it isn't really. It's a company buying in additional resource to add to the resource pool. They're not a subcontracted company, more like a temporary member of staff contracted for a short period of time, treated in the same as a calculation point of view in R&D claims. Elections, that is a formal process by which companies can tell HMRC they are choosing to be treated in a certain way. So for instance, if subcontractors are working at lower rates, which you might find quite common in the case of, say, younger software companies, it may very well be that the director of said business also has a software development service business that he would charge back to them at a lower cost. This is a way of moving that needle from 65% of the subcontractor's costs up to 100%, but making a special case. It's just ensuring that we're capturing as much cost here as possible and within the rules. Intangible assets, these typically include software, brand, or goodwill. Claudia has already significantly touched upon these so far. Effectively, it's how IP can carry significant long-term value in a business over a number of years. And this expenditure is effectively brought onto the balance sheet. The whole cost of that IP development can be claimed in year 1, which would effectively yield a return of up to 33%. And travel and subsistence, perhaps not so relevant in the world we now live in, but hopefully it will be again very soon. Any travel and associated costs can be reclaimed on the basis that they were first borne by the employee and not the company. It's a strange quirk, but there you go. The essence, however, of this quite intricate slide is essentially about maximizing cost capture. In doing so, that enables a higher level of R&D claim, whilst inherently building its robustness against audit or investigation at some point down the line, if indeed that were to happen. So in terms of the current marketplace, a number of options are there for businesses, innovating businesses, to effectively act as an interface between said business and the HMRC. We've seen the emergence of a number of R&D portals in the past couple of years. They occupy a space predominantly the smaller claim end of the market, and on this basis may charge lower fees, which can be very attractive to those businesses. But with that said, the output in any claim is only as good as the input in terms of its granularity, its breadth, and its inherent robustness. So for anyone in charge of the process of making any claim, they are effectively taking on the liability of its accuracy. So that's something important to note there. Accountants, well, many of whom we work with, they're exceptionally good with numbers. They're very strong partners of Amplify. They always have been, and they will continue to be. On occasion, the reason they might partner with a specialist firm like us is to, I suppose, enhance their technical understanding of what a business might actually do, particularly in the tech space, to drive improved outcomes for the business. A number of large specialist providers occupy the market. They have commensurately large service and support centres, significant R&D claims experience built up over the last 10 to 15 years for sure. But on the basis of that size and scale, their costs can occasionally be deemed prohibitive. Their volume approach may also engender a lack of flexibility. So where would Amplify Solutions sit? Well, we would like to think that we are in a boutique provider space, without wishing to go into sales pitch in any way, but I will, just very briefly. We believe we strike the right balance between our understanding of the data, of the nominal ledger, extracting as much value out of that as we can, the technical elements of the project, bringing in as very, very knowledgeable individuals to build a strong technical narrative that combined with the data. The flexibility of our fee structure, which there is, and then the inherent robustness, I use that phrase once or twice, that underpins everything that we do. So in light of this, a couple of claims that we've also worked on recently in case studies. This one is a software business with about 30 employees. The challenge that faced them was the rigidity of existing coding software and the lack of agility that actually afforded its clients in the market, with increasing security threats, especially in the current year. A number of uncertainties existed. For instance, could that solution be scaled and at the same time delivered in line with expected SLAs that were currently in the market? Successful outcome that was achieved was a solution that could be not only commercialized, but actually improved industry standards. The value of this particular claim to this business was in excess of £300,000 in one claim year only, a significant cash injection. Another case study, this one is in an engineering company in oil and gas sector. They developed a new piece of precision hardware that could operate in a subsea environment. So the uncertainties in this case were whether such equipment could be relied upon in such a harsh environment, but whilst delivering reliable and accurate results. So again, the successful outcome was a development of a prototype that could be commercialized whilst performing to acceptable industry standards. The value of this particular claim, again, in excess of £200,000 to that business. So the R&D scheme itself, it's been in play for 20 years now. It's a flagship state aid measure from the UK government, and it's seen exponential growth over the years. If we look at the number of cases in green, that's the number of SMEs claiming on an annual basis. So that figure rose from 13,000 in 2013 up to 37,000 in 2016, a growth of 181%. That shows you, I suppose, the increasing awareness across the country of this level of tax relief, but it's important to note that there's still a lot of companies that are not aware of it, and they might not be maximizing how much they're claiming on an annual basis. The rate at which the government will enhance costs attributable to R&D in purple circles there, that resultant figure is then deductible in tax computations. And you can clearly see the incredible growth that's happened, certainly in recent years as well. The scheme is UK-wide. All 4 nations avail it. We've seen impressive growth of participation in the scheme across Northern Ireland. England, not surprisingly, occupies the lion's share of the claims. Scotland notably hasn't kept pace for the rest of the UK, despite its renowned innovation ecosystem. There's a lot of work trying to harness that ecosystem that we've got, and positive reviews coming from the likes of Mark Logan, who's now government advisor, and ScotGov's 10-year strategic growth plan, which they launched last week, are positive signs that we might see a growth in the utilisation of this measure. But fundamentally, the backbone of the scheme is with smaller businesses all over the UK whose benefit level could be up to 50k. That's 40,000 businesses in 2018 and 2019 alone. Next slide. Yeah, so sectors. So SME sector itself accounts for nearly 2/3 of the entire R&D scheme. That's just under 3 billion in claims in 2019. The RDEC scheme for businesses, which we won't really go into too much detail today, is for turnover in excess of 100 million euros per annum. Surprisingly, the tech sector is not actually the largest source of claims. It's life sciences. Again, not surprising given what's been happening this year. The white coats, as it were, are life sciences. Smaller claiming sectors such as wholesale and retail or construction, typically we see development of bespoke software or production techniques within those particular sectors. So you may be wondering, why does the government do this? Why is it giving away all this free money, as it were, every year? Well, in the simplest possible terms, it's an investment for them, and it works. For every £1 that the government pays out, they would expect to get back around about £2, sometimes more, over about a 5-year period. How does it achieve this? Well, one pillar of that would be VAT spend on equipment, the materials that companies buy to develop new products and solutions. Corporation tax goes up as these businesses grow and become more profitable. Most importantly, however, is it places more people in work. That's the big prize. PAYE, national insurance contributions, VAT spend in the economy as a result of that. And equally significantly, it would reduce the burden on social security and take more people off benefits. So as part of our claims process, we want our clients to make the most of the scheme, obviously. We want to build long-term, prosperous relationships, not just now, but in future years. R&D can be claimed annually. If it's the first claim, you can look back 2 whole closed accounting periods. So on that basis, the granular cost capture, as I've covered previously, is critical. So keeping an activity log every month as you go along is the first step to building more thorough claims. Whichever accounting platform is in play, for example, Xero, always good to code specific activity with a nominal ledger as you go along. Time recording for staff undertaking R&D activity, typically measured more in days per month as opposed to hours per day. That days per month would meet the level of allocation that the HMRC would deem acceptable. It's always good to ask your subcontractors to itemize invoices with specific R&D tax and associated costs. And also be aware of grants that have been received. Without going into too much detail about this, generally speaking, grants should be taken ahead of R&D tax credits. Why? Essentially because of the generosity of the R&D SME scheme. It's considered as state aid, as are grants. So that means that R&D credits may be restricted where a company has already received a grant. It doesn't prevent R&D being claimed, but it would mean that that company would most likely be moved into the RDEC scheme, where the rate at which relief can be claimed is significantly lower. R&D tax relief and grants can be deployed by business, but as I say, both of them, but just be very careful about planning ahead. the time taken to pitch for a grant, for instance, and the size of that grant should be balanced against the reduction in R&D claims that would occur as a result of moving on to the RDEC scheme. But ultimately, by adopting this best practice, you pick up more cost. If you don't do this, you might forget that member of staff X did task Y, and that higher degree of granularity leads to a higher level of claim. And another thing that Amplify will do with each and every one of its clients is a post-claims process. It shows the client we're committed to helping them grow, and it also proves to the HMRC that we're putting in the right processes to improve cost capture. So in terms of the future, there's actually quite a lot of reasons to be cheerful. The Business Growth Fund have proposed the creation of a 15 billion UK National Renewal Fund from a range of very well capitalised private sources. BGF states that growing twice as fast as GDP, that's roughly 21,400 small and medium-sized businesses that make up the growth economy, are at the heart of the UK's dynamism, creativity and prosperity. But there's quite often, and for a very long time, there's been a persistent shortfall in equity funding for this growth economy. The growth economy gap is made worse by the UK's regional disparities. So the ambition is to close this gap, particularly to level up the economy by tackling these regional disparities across the 4 nations of the UK, but also increasing a national focus on R&D. The government has already made a significant down payment on an investment-led recovery with a future fund. And now it's the right time to back this growth economy by kickstarting an investment and an innovation-led recovery. So as part of this recovery, R&D tax relief itself, as a flagship state aid measure, will continue to play a crucial role and be pivotal in attracting, encouraging the brightest young business minds and businesses into the UK to set up limited companies here. Also, we hope, encourage businesses to stay in the UK in a post-Brexit, post-pandemic world. During the pandemic, we've seen 73% of Scottish businesses being encouraged to adopt new technologies to provide their goods and services, while 81% of large businesses and 66% of SMEs accelerated their digital plans. It's without a doubt businesses that have embraced the digital transformation are the ones that are currently flourishing. So we are experiencing extremely challenging times and quite a restrictive business environment. But it's those businesses who have adapted their practice and harnessed their innovative spirit who appear to be benefiting the most. And it's this kind of progress that we hope to see more of and help enable across the whole economy. So the question I'd really put out to all of the attendees today is, where do you currently see your portfolio companies, or indeed your own organizations if you're innovating yourselves, and where would you like them to be, or where would you like yourselves to be? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roger. That was great. Appreciate that. Folks, I'm going to go pull on to John Nemo's presentation in 2 seconds. If you can add any questions you have to the Q&A section, that'd be great. We've got a couple and we'll come through an email separately, but if you could pop questions in there, I can have a look at them during this last section here, and then I can share them with the group following this. We'll have time for Q&A afterwards. John's the founding partner at Rooney Nemo, or one of the two, I should say. Is going to chat to you just now. And John, pass it over to yourself. You're on mute just now, so I'll let you take yourself off and go for it. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie, and hi, everybody. One of the key focuses of our business is to help high growth companies scale up, fundraise, operate in the UK, Europe, USA and China, and then to exit successfully. So we've offices in the UK, obviously, New York, San Francisco, Beijing, Shenzhen and Hong Kong. And at any given time, our office in New York will be helping a number of UK companies to launch into that market. The San Francisco office at any point in time is usually either fighting with or trying to sell something to the likes of Apple, Samsung, Microsoft. And the Beijing and Shenzhen offices are adept at getting money in and out of China, and also providing a safe landing in a very different culture for UK and US businesses. Rather than speaking generically, because I think everybody obviously knows the benefits of being prepared, etc., I was going to touch on a few specifics of things that we've seen in the market in these unusual times. The first one really relates to valuations. Jamie, if you could maybe flick onto the next slide, please. Brilliant, thank you. It relates to valuations, and obviously in this uncertain time, a lot of people are looking at the valuation of their company, not really quite sure what it is. Some people are taking advantage of that to restructure their share schemes, whether that is EMI options or whether it's hurdle shares or growth shares, because obviously there is the opportunity to deliver really quite a lot of value to key stakeholders, management teams and key employees through that sort of thing. But if the valuation is lower, obviously then the tax benefits of doing that are very much greater. So we've seen an increase in people cancelling existing options and replacing them with either new options, perhaps with a lower strike price, or indeed going for a kind of hurdle share scheme structure. One other thing that we're seeing quite frequently now, obviously there's a focus on fundraising for a lot of different companies in a lot of different circumstances, really. Claudia and Roger obviously have spoken a lot about R&D, and one of the benefits of an R&D focused company is that it can often facilitate using the EIS scheme in circumstances where it might otherwise not be possible. So I think most people are aware of the 7-year limit, the default limit for EIS fundraising. But of course, if you can qualify as being a knowledge intensive company, then that increases to 10 years. So we've seen quite a lot of people now going back through their accounts and trying to work out, do they qualify on the basis of their R&D expenditure? Can they show that it's been greater than 10% of their turnover over the past 3 years, or over 15% in one of those years? And certainly a lot of people have found that they do actually still qualify in circumstances where they didn't really expect to do so. The other exemptions really in relation to the EIS scheme that people have been pushing are the follow-on investment exemption, which of course gets you out of the time limit entirely, or going for the new geographic market or new product market exemptions, which again can get you out of any time limit at all. Important in relation to EIS is that if a company has utilised it or wishes to use it, then they have to be very careful really with international expansion. And that's where the benefits of joined up thinking really are vital. Most people, if they go to the US and they ask a US advisor, will be advised to set up a Delaware LLC, or certainly it's very common. But in actual fact, that being a pseudo partnership structure can blow up the EIS reliefs for existing investors if it's not treated very carefully. One other facet in the market we've been seeing recently is people looking at new IP licensing structures, often driven by competing demands on the intellectual property within a company or a group. And this might be where there's a joint venture or a key partner who's wanting to try to take some sort of security over the IP before investing in it. And certainly a lot of people are now looking at putting the IP into a special purpose vehicle, whether that's a UK company, a UK subsidiary, or indeed offshore, such as in the Isle of Man. Or elsewhere, the Channel Islands, that sort of thing. But of course, that does have implications for the sorts of things that Claudia and Roger were talking about earlier on. If you're looking to use the UK tax benefits, such as patent box or R&D claims. We've recently launched a general counsel service that has proven quite popular with companies, really to advise on these sorts of things in a proactive manner. And then the final thing that I wanted to touch on is that we recently published a research paper, which we can share with you, really analysing data in the market over the past 5 years, as far as who is investing in UK companies and who indeed is buying those UK companies. And what it showed is that overwhelmingly it is actually UK companies that usually are the ones that are investing in or buying UK businesses, closely followed by the US, and then with a bit of interest from China and the likes of France. So if anyone would like a sight of that, then we'd be happy to share it. Jamie, back to you.
Sorry. Apologies, John. Yeah, I'm still on mute there trying to get it off. That was great. I'll just going to stop the share there just now. Just went up to the group again. So hopefully there we can go to a couple of the questions. See one there. Initially, let's open up. I will say, anyone wants to stick their hand up and ask a question, we'd be delighted to answer. We may ask the right person in the group if we can. Roger, there's one here for you just initially. I'll kick off with from Jason. Just says, what do you say to a company who doesn't think there are costs or R&D qualifying, or worried about the HMRC coming back on a claim? You're on mute just now, Roger. I'll say to you, so take yourself off and you can answer that one.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for the question, Jason. You know, I think it's always quite encouraging to hear that, you know, I have R&D activity, but I'm worried it might not qualify. What are the pitfalls of making a claim? It shows that there's an interest there. It shows there's evidence of R&D qualifying activity and innovation, and that's ultimately the sort of business that we want to work with, to improve their outcome, to improve their cash flow. So, you know, I suppose in succinctly as possible, I'd say, well, let us, I suppose, be the judge of what you've done, what it's cost, where you've applied this spend, where in your business, against whom, what particular challenges you're trying to overcome, or problem you're solving, or thing that you're developing. Because we've got, as I say, we've got a very broad and deep knowledge base in our business to decipher everything that's going on, apply or allocate these spends against all these different people, which I suppose in itself would overcome the "I don't think I can claim" challenge. In terms of the open to audit or investigation, well, again, because we build this particularly granular narrative, we don't make broad assumptions on the technical data in any way, or the nominal ledger. So we're building an inherently robust and defensible picture to HMRC, and we present it in such a way the HMRC will understand it. So I would encourage any business out there with doubts about whether its activity qualifies or not to really take that further step and ask a specialist business such as us to take over for them. Jamie, have you got anything to add to that? Or?
No, that's perfect, Roger. Thanks for that. I think that's pretty distinct. John, quick question for you. Come off mute if you can. Yeah, thanks. You mentioned obviously your sort of legal counsel side of things, and I suppose that's probably come over from the States to the degree, that sort of model. You know, do you see anything else, you know, in terms of, you know, particularly the West Coast, but America's sort of scale up scene's obviously been, it's been going a long time. Do you see any sort of trends from over there in terms of how businesses are doing it coming over to the UK, or have you seen that in the last period of time?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we're seeing a bit more activity actually from US investors and US investment structures. So whereas in the UK, you know, you might expect people to start off with ordinary shares, then maybe have preferred shares or something like that. Certainly the US ideas, which sometimes have a coupon running on the shares, and it actually rolls up and increases the investors' economic stake in the business. We're seeing people trying to do that more and more frequently. And of course, it's something that you really need to be very careful about, because it doesn't take all that long. You know, if you don't get your exit within 2 or 3 years, then all of a sudden your investor, has gone from having 20% of the business to 30%. If you don't get your exit, until year 5 or 6, then they might well be up, beyond 50 or 55%. And there are relatively relatively well-known examples, in actual fact, of exits recently that looked like they were fantastically successful, but because it was actually US investors there as well, because they had this sort of increasing coupon on the economic value, the founders got very little out. So it's something that really needs a lot of attention if you're in that situation.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, John. That's great. I've got a question here from Dale Graham here. So it's an R&D related question, but it's probably one for Claudia and Roger to maybe have a think about. Yeah, so I asked Claudia's view on it first. So Dale's asked them, either has there been much R&D activity or claims in the textiles sector at all? Specific client in mind with a sun-safe product, pre-scale stage, and suppliers in the UK and EU, I suppose. Before we go to the R&D bit, Claudia, would you think, from that space, that textile sector, have you seen much from from an intellectual property patent sort of ideal?
Not a lot, in the traditional sense, but from the point of view of smart textiles, there's a lot of innovation that is happening in this space. For instance, if you think of compression stockings, which are used in hospitals as during an operation, for instance, to prevent vein thrombosis, nobody's actually knows how much pressure they apply onto the legs, for instance. And in the context of smart innovation in the textile sector, the smart textiles will be those which have some integrated sensing woven within the actual compression stocking. In terms of how is this innovation protected? Quite often is protected by patents, unsurprisingly, and it is technical innovation, and it can most definitely qualify for both R&D and patent box claims. But in the textile industry, there is a lot of activity in the design sector, and this is unsurprising, really, considering the background or the heritage that Scotland has in the textile industry sector. And designs are another type of intellectual asset and intellectual property right, which could form the basis of R&D tax claims, for sure.
Roger, would you sort of pull that into the manufacturer type space, that side of things for an R&D claim?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to add really in what Claudia said there. It certainly fall under manufacturing and material developments and so on, sustainability. Spoken of software also as well. I haven't personally worked on any claims in the time in textiles. Jamie, have you got any?
Yeah, we do have
longer back.
That space, yeah, we do. That'd be probably a slightly more traditional business in the textile industry, that a lot of their claim is based more around the engineering element of what they do. I suppose the changes to the actual products themselves. The hard products, you've got to look at things like your consumable waste as well. So if you're prototyping, creating a new product in that textile space, the likelihood is you're probably getting rid of a lot of product in the process of doing that. So there'll be something around consumable waste. There'll certainly be man hours, probably some subcontracted cost there. So, and if it's if it's a big you think it's always worth exploring, so that the spend lies. So hopefully that's useful. They'll onwards come through. Oh, there. Thank you. That's great. Okay, I think that takes up to 12:05 just now. Don't think I have any more questions that popped through the second. I'll leave it up to maybe everyone just have a quick summary, if that's okay. So Claudia, you want to do a quick close, if you like, just in summary from your side of things?
Yes, absolutely. I think it is clear, the message which both Roger and John have put across is that it is clear that companies need to look at their innovation, need to take stock of it, need to understand it, need to classify it, be it for R&D or tax claims, for patent box claims, but also they need to understand the innovation and understand how that can be used to put the company in a strong position for international markets. And this is where John has started explaining to us how consequences of doing or not doing something in a jurisdiction has implications in others, as far as international markets for various companies are concerned. And again, it is important to always understand the value that companies add from the moment they are formed, from the moment they start to grow, to the moment they are sold, a trade sale. And that value, unsurprisingly, lies in the intangible assets the companies create. But those intangible assets should be named, should be listed, should be classified, should be traceable, dated, because they are property. They are property which the company can then use to its advantage and leverage it in various ways. And I will leave it there. And of course, needless to say, I'm happy to take any questions offline. And I see that some of the attendees have contacted me by LinkedIn already, but feel free to reach out as often as you have IP related or innovation management questions. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Claudia. That was great. Roger, you want to just quick summation from yourself?
Yeah, well, you know, as I touched upon in my presentation, we've already seen a glimmer of the type of phenomenal enhancements that companies can make very quickly. They've got inbuilt innovative spirit, and that's clear in a number of sectors who are currently flourishing. And I think innovation and investment combined are going to ultimately see the world recover out of this. The R&D scheme effectively is just a kind of the rocket fuel that will help drive the UK's competitive edge. So it's just important that any business that's innovating out there in any shape or form and is spending money on doing so, make sure that they pull all the levers that are available to them. And that's why we as a specialist provider can come in and help them optimize that outcome. And likewise, for everybody who's listened today, thanks very much for your time. I'm available to be contacted, very happy to chat. Following this, please get in touch on LinkedIn or by other means. Cheers.
Thanks, Roger. John, do you want to, again, for yourself, just sort of sum up thoughts, if you like?
Sure. I think Claudia actually summarised for me as well. So other than saying thank you to everybody for participating, that's all from me.
No problem. Thanks very much. Well, folks, this will be recorded, the session. So if you have any further questions as well, of course, you can get in contact with any of us. Our details are up there. I think all been shared on the invite as well, and all available on our sites, I believe, as well, if you need to contact us. But thank you very much for everyone for joining. Looking forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.